from the third annual convention of the Massachusetts Homeschool Organization of Parent Educators, held at the First Assembly of God in Worcester, Massachusetts. This is a presentation on Alpha-Phonics by Mr. Sam Blumenfeld, given on Saturday afternoon, March 28, 1992.
It causes to teach a child to read. And that's where the schools are failing the most, as you know. And the schools have been doing an awful job for years and years, and so we have to pick up the pieces. How many here have children who have not yet learned to read? Oh, wonderful, and you're really just beginning. So you want to know how to do it the right way, and to do it the way that will produce the results you want. Now, I've been writing on this subject for years. I wrote a book in the 1970s entitled The New Illiterates, in which I analyzed the Dick and Jane reading program line by line, and I came to the conclusion that any of the symptoms of dyslexia, because it was a sight method, and unless you had a teacher who taught you some phonics, you would probably become reading disabled. And of course, we have millions of functional illiterates in America today who are doing the best they can with the so-called education they got. Now, the educators threw out alphabetic phonics in the early 1930s, and they put in this look, say, whole word method because they wanted to change America, not because they wanted to teach children to read. They wanted to de-emphasize reading skills, de-emphasize the development of language skills, and put the emphasis on the development of social skills. They said that kids did not have to learn to read so early or so well. And the method that they concocted was this look, say, Dick and Jane nonsense, which has been with us, and in recent years has been metamorphosed into something called whole language, which is so bad, so horrible, that I wouldn't wish it on a dog, let alone a human being. But that's what's being taught in the schools. Now, how should you teach your child to read? You should use the technique that is used in teaching a child to read any alphabetic writing system. Ours is an alphabetic writing system. Now, what does that mean? That means that we use an alphabet. Now, what is an alphabet? An alphabet is a set of letters that stand for the irreducible speech sounds of the language. You see, those letters have meaning. They're not there just for decoration. They actually mean something. Those letters stand for the irreducible speech sounds of the language. Now, prior to the invention of the alphabet, humankind used pictographs or ideographs. That is, little pictures that stood for ideas and actions and emotions and even words. But around 2,000 years BC, somebody made a remarkable discovery. Somebody discovered that all of human language, everything we say, is composed of a small number of irreducible speech sounds. And that individual said to himself, well, instead of using this complex system of ideographs composed of thousands and thousands of little pictures like Chinese, none of which look like anything they represent, which take years to memorize, which are easily forgotten, why don't I create a small set of symbols to stand for the irreducible speech sounds of the language, and then we will have a very simple means of transcribing the spoken word directly into written form, and the written language back into its spoken form. And so the first alphabet was invented. Now, concomitant with the invention of the alphabet, something else in tremendous importance occurred. The scripture appeared. Why the scripture? Because man had to wait until he had an alphabetic writing system before the word of God could be put on paper. Because if you know what we read in St. John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So there is the Word and there is God. The power of the Word is God's power, because how did God create the universe? He didn't hire a contractor. What does it say in the Bible at the beginning? Let there be light, and there was light. God did not have to hire an electrician. The Word did it, just the Word. Now God gave us the power of the Word because He made us in His image. So the Word is very special to us because only human beings have it, and that's why every child learns to speak his or her language virtually from, birth. Isn't it true? They start learning, they hear, they start learning. By the time they're 2 and 3, they're babbling away. Mm-hmm. By the time they're ready to go to school, they have mastered a speaking vocabulary into thousands of words. And if you put them in a public school, they say, see, spot, run. They teach see, spot, run. Well, that child can run rings around that teacher. The child looks at that book and says, how stupid can they be? The kids know when they're being taught stupid things, but the kids are very intelligent. Remember, at that time in their lives, their brains are expanding, their knowledge, their abilities are expanding at a rate that will never be duplicated later in their lives. So they are enormously intelligent, they feel intelligent. When they get into a public school, they suddenly feel dumb, because the schools deliberately try to make these kids feel dumb, because they can't learn. Well, anyway, God gave us the power of the Word, and He gave us the alphabet. The alphabet was created so that God's Word could be put on paper. That's why we have an alphabet. Because when you read the Bible, that is God's Word accurately and precisely. That's not something that you guess at. It's something that you can read. Now, how do you teach a child to read an alphabetic writing system? Well, there are 3 simple steps. The first step is to teach the child to recognize the letters of the alphabet. And that can be done very simply through the alphabet song, through blocks. So you use any method you want. I use a simple alphabet poem based on the alphabet song, which is simply, as you know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, N, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. Now, some people will say W, X, Y, and Z. W has 3 syllables. Don't try to squeeze it into 2 syllables. And then add a 3rd syllable with and. Because some kids think that there's a letter and Z. There is no letter and Z. So take your time with W. It's the W. You can say it beautifully. W. It's not W. It's not W. It's W. You see, 3 syllables. So that's the way you recite the poem. Children generally learn the alphabet vocally before they learn them visually, because their sense of language is so sharp. They learn to speak. So now you're going to get them to read, and so now they have to focus their eyes, and they've got to be attuned to very, subtle, small changes, detail. And so you want to make sure that they know the letters of the alphabet, can recognize them, and so you teach them by having them look at them visually, of course, and also to speak them, utter them. So they're learning the names of the letters. The next step is to teach the child the sounds that the letters stand for. Since all of these letters have sounds. Now, in our language, of course, we have 26 letters in our alphabet. But how many sounds do we have in English? 44. There are 44. So there's some debate. Sometimes some people say 43, 45. But generally, most agree that it's 44 sounds. Now, if you're going to have an alphabet of 26 letters and 44 sounds, incidentally, how did that happen? Why don't we have a 44-letter alphabet? Well, what happened was this. When the Romans conquered the British Islands, they imposed the Latin alphabet on the people there. Now, the people there had different sounds than the Latin. And so they had to make do with an alphabet of 26 letters for 44 sounds. Now, how do you accommodate yourself when you have that kind of a situation? Well, some of your letters stand for more than one sound. And some of your sounds are represented by more than one letter. For example, the sh sound is represented by SH, the ch is represented by CH, the is represented by WH, and our th is represented by TH. It's not tuh, it's the 2 letters together stand for TH. The letter A stands for at least 4 different sounds. It stands for the long A as in apron or April. It stands for the A sound as in cat or bat. It stands for the sound as in car or father, and it stands for the or sound as in all or ball. Well, then how does a child distinguish, how does a child know which sound to make when he sees the letter? Well, if you teach the letter sounds in their spelling families, the child has no problem learning the distinctions. And that's what I do in my Alpha-Phonics program, is I teach the letter sounds in their spelling families. Now, once you teach the child the letter sounds, and you have to use a certain amount of drill, because the importance of that second step is to make sure that the child develops an automatic association between letters and sounds. That's the proper association in learning to read an alphabetic writing system, whether it's the Greek alphabet, the Russian alphabet, or the English alphabet. The child has to develop that automatic association between letters and sounds so that when you see the letters, you hear the sounds. You see the syllable, you hear the sound. It's a sound symbol system, you see. And because we have developed language, having a sound symbol system as a reading system also helps us develop language. It doesn't become a block, it enhances language. Because after the invention of the alphabet, what did you have? Reading became much easier. It's much easier to learn to memorize the sounds of 26 letters than it is to memorize 50,000 little pictures. You know. Also, it permitted the incredible expansion of vocabulary. Why do we have such an incredible vocabulary in English? Because it's so easy to invent new words. And every time you have a new idea, a new product, you must have a new word. And I'm sure you've seen all of these new pharmaceutical terms that are invented every day by these market people and the big drug companies. Wonderfully multisyllabic words, you know, that you have to really break up into syllables in order to be able to read them. But to give you an idea how easy it is to invent new words, even children invent words in America, you know, as you all know. And after 6 months, they're in Time magazine. I mean, you've all heard of the word nerd. Where did that come from? But you can say it, you can spell it, and you can define it, you see. But the Chinese have a tough time creating a little picture for nerd. And you wonder who in Peking or Beijing is in charge of the little squigglies, you know. You can't, in China, you can't go around saying, I've got a new squiggly for nerd. But in America, anyone in the English-speaking world can invent any word they like. And if other people hear it, they're liable to repeat it, you know. Well, anyway, so I said the second step was to teach the sounds of the language, the sounds, and the third step is then to have the child read words and sentences and little stories. So that's the 3 steps. Now, in my book, I try to, after the child has learned the alphabet, what I do is I introduce the child first to the short A sound. And incidentally, if any of you here have never had phonics yourself, how many here have never had phonics themselves and don't know very much about phonics? All right, well, because of that, I also put this on audio tape for those parents who would have problems remembering the sounds. Because it's one thing to read about the sound. It's another thing to be able to pronounce it correctly, you see. So if you have any problems, there are audio tapes to help you. But I start with the short A because that's the simplest thing. Short A, of course, is A. And you teach the child then the A in conjunction with 5 consonant letters, the M, N, S, T, X, and you tell the child that the letter M stands for the sound. And if you put A and together, you get am, you see. And the N is the sound, and if you put A and together, you get an. The S is the sound, if you put A and together, you get as. Now, of course, we have 2 sounds in S. Sometimes you have a softer Z sound and then a harder S sound. But at this point, you're just teaching him to read this word as, that sound. The T is the sound of T. The letter stands for T. So at. The X stands for really KS. And the way you isolate a sound is to take a word like tax. Just remove the ta. What do you have left? You see. That's an irreducible speech sound. You can't reduce it any more than that, except that with the X you do have a combination of KS. Well then, so in the very first lesson they learned these 5 consonant sounds with the short A and 5 2-letter words. And then you explain them, you teach them vocabulary. Because they've used these words before. You can tell them whether, give them a sentence like, I am going to the store, I have an apple, he is as tall as she is, we are at the store, father has an axe. Incidentally, there are 2 ways to spell axe, AX and AXE. They're both acceptable spellings. In the next lesson, what we do is then we take those letters that they've learned and we put the S in front of the an, and what do we get? Sam, you see. Then we put the M in front of an, and what do we get? Man. Then we teach the letter H. Now what does H stand for? And you put in front of as, and you get has. Then we put the S in front of ab, we get sack. And we put the T in front of axe, and we get tax. And you might as well tell a child what a tax is, because he or she will be paying it for the rest of his or her life. In lesson 3, we are already building a spelling families. The am, sam, and, man, as, has, at, had, axe, tax. And so we can make our first sentences. Sam, period. Sam has an axe, period. And you teach the child that sentences begin with capital letters, that proper names begin with capital letters, and that a period goes at the end of a sentence. So you're teaching the letters, the sounds, sentences, spelling families, and of course you should have the child begin writing at this time also to write these words, and you should only teach cursive writing. Do not teach the child to print. Go directly into cursive writing. Now, the reason why I say that is because that's the way I was taught, and my generation was taught in public school. You say, I'm a little older than you are. And people of my generation were all taught cursive first. We were never taught to print in school. Printing was taught later on in art class. Printing was not considered writing, you see. So we all learned cursive first, and that's why your grandparents have much better handwriting than you do. Isn't it true that most of the other grandparents have better handwriting? Why? Because they learned cursive first. You see, what happens is this. If you teach cursive first, you can always learn to print later on. But if you teach printing first, if you spend 2 years of printing and holding your pen this way, straight up and down, and you're applying pressure, and the paper is straight, you're going to develop habits of movement that are going to stick with you. And then when you tell your child to make this transition to cursive, well, it's a totally different feel. You have to relax. Cursive is much easier than ball and stick. Cursive is much easier because cursive is relaxed. You relax your arm. You're using the motions that children like to use. Your children, when they're scribbling at 3 years old, making circles, that's what they're doing. They're writing cursive in their own little way, you see. They don't draw straight lines and perfect little circles. That's very unnatural, you see. So they would enjoy cursive, and there are only three movements in all of cursive. There's the undercurve, the overcurve, and the up and down. That's all there is to cursive. And when I was going to school back in the early 1930s, long before you people were born, we had penmanship. They actually taught us penmanship. And we had real ink, wet ink. And we had to dip it. And we did those exercises, the ovals and the rainbows. I don't know how many of you ever did the rainbows, and then the straight ups and downs. We did those exercises to develop penmanship. So I strongly urge you to teach your children cursive at the same time that you're teaching them to read. Now, some people say, well, won't they be confused at the 2 types of letters? No, they won't. As a matter of fact, cursive will help them because many children are confused when you have these very simple ball and stick, a B looks an awful lot like a D, an F looks an awful lot like a T, a P looks an awful lot like a Q. But now if you move your arm the way you would write cursive, a B goes this way. You see, like an L, you started like an L, and a D starts this way, as if you were writing an A. So you're not going to confuse B's and D's. You're not going to confuse F's and T's, and F goes this way, and a T goes that way. You're not going to confuse a P and a Q. A P goes this way, and a Q goes that way, you see. So it helps. It actually helps in reading, so the child sees the difference and can recognize the difference. All right, then we teach the rest of the consonant sounds, consonant letters, with the short A. Now here, in Lesson 5, we've already expanded our spelling families. We have add, we've already taught the letter D, so now we have add, had, dad, sad, tad, mad, am, ham, dam, sam, and, man, dan, tan. Then we have as, has, and then I put a little box around was, because it's in the as, has family, but it's not pronounced was, is it? And that's why children have no problem with irregular words. The reason is that if they pronounce the word the way it was spelled, it wouldn't mean anything. They're not going to say was, I was going, you know, or I was at home. They know the difference. So don't worry about those things. But we put a little box around it. You just tell the child that WAS is was and is not was. Now some parts of the country they pronounce it was, some was. I don't know. What is it in Worcester? Is it was? Was? Okay. Was. When I was in Australia, I was teaching the short O and the og, fog family, and I had the word D-O-G, and I said, well, how do you pronounce dog in Australia? They said dog. So it was not irregular in Australia. But I said in New York, they say dog. You know, the dog is in the fog. The dog is in the fog. You know. But anyway, those are minor things. So then we can make many more sentences. We have many more words that create sentences. In this lesson 7, we introduce them to and, the ND. So we can expand the word and into and then we can teach hand, sand, land, etc. We teach the L, the B, the C, the G. Incidentally, the C, when you're teaching, first you teach the letter C as the K sound. The letter C stands for two sounds, the K sound and the S sound. It stands for K at if the next letter is an A or an O or a U, or if it's at the end of a word, and it stands for the S sound in front of an I or an E. Circus. C-I-R-C-U-S, circus, you see, circle. That gives you an idea of how, the kind of things you have to tell your child. Why don't we wait until I'm done, and then we can finish this. So I teach all of those, we teach CK in lesson 11, we teach the word in lesson 12, and then in lesson 14 we give them this drill. 3 letters, all of the, every possible combination with short A, every possible combination with the consonant letters. And there are many nonsense syllables here, but those syllables will later turn up in words, like a syllable like bap. Well, baptize, Baptist. Later on they'll be reading it, so there's nothing here that has to be unlearned. See, there are 2 no-nos in education. Never teach anything that must be unlearned later on. Public schools do that all the time. And never permit a child to develop a bad habit that you're going to try to then undo. And the schools do that also all of the time. For example, now they have invented spelling. So the children are now developing all these bad spelling habits. And they're saying, oh, the children will overcome that later on their own. You know, that'll be the day. It's the same thing with writing. Make sure your children hold their pens correctly. I don't know how many times I've seen people, adults, hold it with with fists, as if they're about to stab somebody. There's the muscular dystrophy hold, there's the four-finger hold, the five-finger hold. All you need are 3 fingers. It's very simple. Because if your child gets in the habit of using 4 fingers, and I don't know how many kids I've seen with 4 fingers, it's almost impossible to get them to break away. And they're just cramping their fingers. They're making it difficult and uncomfortable to write by using more fingers than they need. 3 fingers is all you need. These should be... I've tried to put a rubber band sometimes around these 2 fingers to prevent the children from using 4 fingers. But you'd be surprised, these kids, once they develop that habit, it's like pulling teeth. You can't break these habits. I know because I've taught in a school for children who have learning problems, and I can tell you, it's awful. So don't let them develop these bad habits. Correct them immediately. Make sure they hold the pen correctly. It rests on this middle finger, and you have the 2 others to guide it, you see. It's very simple. It looks like a little thing peeping out of a little triangle, So we drill them. It's very important. The drill is important because you want to develop that automatic association. Automaticity is very important. Then we move into the rest of the short vowels, and we teach them in contrasting spelling families. Bad, bed, bid, bob, bud. Bag, bag, big, bog, bug. As you know, some children have problem with the eh and the I. It's a little too fine for them. But if they see it and they hear it, they know the difference between a pen and a pin. But sometimes children think that a pen is a pin, or a pin is a pen, But if you show that there is a difference, that pin is P-I-N and pen is P-E-N, then they will get accustomed to the fine tuning of their ears. But the human ear is so fine. It can detect the slightest change. You know how easy it is for you to detect a foreign accent? Or anybody's accent, if they're not just from where you think they ought to be, Then we go into the rest of the short vowels. We give them the same drill, the same treatment as we did the short A, to make sure that the child learns them well. And now, of course, you should be teaching vocabulary. Whenever there is a word in the spelling, for example, quill. What is a quill? Well, that's an opportunity. The child could read the word quill, but you might as well tell them what a quill is, or discuss it. A goose quill or whatever. A word, a word like nix, which is short for no. They use it in Variety magazine. Nix, pix. Now in lesson 21 we introduced the TH sound. Up until then we have not used a single the. Most books will use the as a sight word. It's not necessary. We don't deal with sight words. There are no sight words in English. Ours is an alphabetic writing system, which means that every single written word stands for its spoken equivalent, you see. And even words like peculiar words, one of a kind like I, E-Y-E. Now, the reason why we have that spelling is we have 3 I's. We've got capital I, which stands for first person. You have A-Y-E, aye, sir. And then you have E-Y-E, which stands for I. Now, some teachers teach the word I as if it were a sight word. They say, see the 2 little I's and the nose in the middle? The E and the Y in the middle? It's not that's not a picture of eyes. It's not a picture of eyes. It's a one-of-a-kind sound symbol for the word I, you see. So don't be tricked into this business of sight words. So we introduced the TH, and now we not only can introduce the word the, but we introduce that, then, thin, this. Now there are 2 sounds to the TH. There's the soft TH, which is than, and then thin, th, as in think. You wouldn't say think, you'd say think, you see. But kids know this, they will read the word in the way it should be pronounced because the spoken language is your reference. The spoken language is your reference. Remember, English writing is standardized in all English-speaking countries. Now, the Australians pronounce things differently. They pronounce the word our, like our town. They say air town, air. Sounds like air, A-I-R. But that's the way they read it. You're not going to change the way they pronounce. Matter of fact, they're going to bring this book out in Australia. We're going to bring out an Australian edition because they do have, their own way of saying things. But you can read an Australian newspaper in your accent with no problem. You can read a London newspaper. You can read a newspaper from Johannesburg, from Nairobi, from Hong Kong, from Savannah, Georgia. The people may sound different down there, but it's all standard English. All right, we move on from there, and then we get into the S, the plurals, the apostrophe S, the short U, and the SH sound, SH words, CH words, the ch, at, chat, at, etc. We give them plenty of review, sentences. Then we move on to now in lesson 38 we have a whole lot of two-syllable words which the children can now read. They're all short vowel two-syllable words like box top, hot dog, zigzag, catnip, gala, linen, visit, nitwit. You may have to define that word. And then we move into teach. In lesson 40, we teach the aw sound, A-L-L, the aw, that particular spelling form. So the child learns ball, call, fall, gall, hall, etc. No big deal. We teach the NG sound then. Ing, bing, ding. Then, fanning, nagging, letting, setting. Now, we have big problems in Massachusetts with ing, don't we? It's always setting, going, doing. Instead of doing, setting, flying. It's always flying, doing, eating, gotta, gonna. I have got to, not gotta. Gonna. I am going to, not gonna. I had a girl, I was tutoring this girl who wanted to be a secretary. And I had her write a little letter, and she wrote the word gonna. I said, there's no such word as gonna. G-O-N-N-A? High school graduate, they never taught her that there was no such word as gonna. I could not believe it. Gonna. Anyway, so have your kids pronounce their INGs. We want to get back to enunciation. There was a time when they were very concerned about proper diction, proper enunciation. I mean, after all, they may want to go on the stage. They may want to become broadcasters, announcers. You do have to speak correctly. Listen to Tom Brokaw, and the rest of them. They all pronounce their words pretty correctly. We go to ER, then we go into the final consonant blends. A consonant blend is two consonant letters that blend together. For example, junk, J-U-N-K, is a junk. It's very important that the youngsters learn these combinations because the way they teach kids today, they don't care in which sequence the letters are written because so many kids today say ax me no questions, ax. Now it's not spelled A-K-S, it's spelled A-S-K, so it's ask. The problem is that when they're teaching children to read words by sight, the kids don't care. The kids are not told that, they're told that the proper sequence of letters is no importance. Not important. Just as long as you get the general picture of the word, the general configuration. Enough high letters, enough short letters, you see, that's all. So, in their minds, they think it's acts rather than as. So it's important for the youngsters to know the proper sequence and to pronounce the words in their proper way, because the letters are in the same sequence in which the sounds are uttered. It's as simple as that. The letters are in the same sequence in which the sounds are uttered. So we have the SK, ask, bask, cask, the SP, asp, lisp, gasp, ST, etc. Then we go into the beginning consonant blends, at the beginnings of words, like the BR, bran, branch, brash, BL, CL, CR, crush, crest, FL, flock, flop, GW, Gwen, SL, sled, etc. And you teach all of those particular blends. And once you're done with the blends, then we go into the long vowels. We save the long vowels for last. Why? Because there is more than one way to write a long vowel sound. Take, for example, the long sound A. The most common way we write long A is A consonant E, as in ate, hate, rate, pale, gale, made, M-A-D-E. The consonant is there. In other words, that's the spelling form. A consonant E. That's the spelling form. The E is not silent. It's just part of the spelling. It's the spelling form. There's no such thing as a silent letter, except when you get the letter like det, D-E-B-T, and maybe at one time it came from the word debit, or something like that, a contraction. But basically, these are spelling forms, and you learn them. So you have the first most common way of writing long A is A consonant E. The second most, and incidentally, in that family, you have in the Cave, Dave, Gave family, you have H-A-V-E, which is have. Another, no child is going to say, I have 2 cents, or I have a hot dog. But yet, have is used as have in words like behave, you see. So you see how it's regular in some instances, but as a word in itself it is not. It's an irregular word. The next form of long A is AI, spelling form. As an aid, A-I-D, made, N-A-I-D. Now you may wonder, why do we have more than one spelling form? Well, because we have so many homonyms in English that if we spell them only by the way they sounded, you wouldn't know what the meaning was. For example, if I said maid, you wouldn't know which maid I was talking about. Am I talking about the maid made the bed? Which maid? You see, maid is M-A-I-D, the maid who makes the bed in the motel, and the maid, M-A-D-E, is the past tense of to make, you see. So the spelling helps us immediately identify the meaning of the word. And it's very useful in spelling because it makes it much easier for comprehension. We have some words that have 3 different pronunciations. As I said, I, and I. We also have veil, and veil, or vein, and vein. The vein in your arm, which is E-I, the weather vane, A-N-E, and then he is very vain, V-A-I-N. You see. So there is a reason why we have these different spelling forms. A-I is the second most common way. Then we also spell long A as A-Y, as in day, or say, or hay, or as clay. Then we also have a few words that are with the A sound that are spelled E-Y, as in obey, or they, T-H-E-Y. Then we have words with E-I. Here is the A sound in which there isn't even an A present. E-I. So you can't say that there are silent letters there, can you? In other words, the E-I together stand for the long A sound. You see. E-I-G-H. Those four letters stand for the one sound A. Now, you may think that it's awfully peculiar in English to have that. There's no reason why more than one letter can stand for a sound. I would remind you that in French, you all know the word water in French, don't you? Eau, de l'eau, E-A-U. E-A-U stands for O. There isn't any O in the word, is there? You know the word bow. I mean, my daughter has a bow. We don't spell it B-O, although we might. It's B-E-A-U, because in French it's a French word, and E-A-U stands for O in French. And so don't knock English. I mean, the French have their problems. But they learn them. I mean, I learned to read French in school. I didn't have any problem. I didn't think it was terribly unusual to see the word heureux. You know how you spell in heureux? E-U-X. E-U-X. That's heureux. In heureux. Anyway, then we go through all of the different ways of writing long A. Then we teach the O sound, spelled A-U or A-W, as in claw, vault, cause, hawk. We teach the R sound as in car, bar, hark, dark, father, etc. We always have sentences. Then we go into the long E. The most familiar form of long E, the most common form is the double E. Then, of course, we have the EA form. E consonant E as in Eve or Steve or these. Then we have the IE as in yield or chief. Long E spelled IE. Then we have long E spelled as Y at the ends of words, as bunny. Y at the end of bunny is long E, stands for long E. Fussy. Y stands for long E. Then we give them drill in the long E words. We have the same problem with the long I. Spell long I, plain I. Y as in dry, try. There, the I at the end stands for long I. So that's why you have to go step by step so the children learn all of these different sounds, all of these different spelling forms in a systematic, logical, step-by-step way. And then there's L-I-E, lie, the I-E standing for I. Now the I-E also stands for long E in their spelling group. So that's why it's important to know which of the spelling forms, and you could do that. You have your child write out these words, spell them out, and that should be easy enough. We have the I consonant E as in time, pine, vine. Then we have long I spelled I-G-H as in sigh, S-I-G-H, high, H-I-G-H. The I-G-H stands for the I. Now, a lot of these spellings, the words, some of these words are pronounced differently. At some, way back when. And spellings have, the pronunciations have changed, but not the spellings. Once the dictionaries were written, the spellings were standardized. And they have not changed over the ages, even though pronunciation has changed. Who knows, maybe someday people will say that going is all right. Or doing is the pronunciation, and they'll say there's a silent G. It's a silent G, going, doing, singing, All right, then we go into the O-U-G-H, which is a very interesting group of words. But again, there I suppose you're dealing with an archaic spelling in words like ought, thought, daughter. Daughter was probably at one time pronounced doctor or something like that, you see. But now it's come down to us as daughter, but we have the spelling. And they're not terribly different words to learn. The long O, then we have the two forms of the double of the OA, then the OW, then the double O. There are two sounds to double O, good food. And oo. Good food. That's how you can remember the two sounds of double O. Good food. Oo, food. Good. And oo. And you just have to learn the categories. And we go into the could, and should. Obviously, that's an archaic spelling. Now, there's a great deal of history in our spelling forms. And that's something your children may become interested in, is when they look up words to find out their origins. Some of our words come from Greek, some of our words come from Latin, and it's nice to know where they come from. There's no sense simplifying our spelling. If we simplified our spelling, we would rid the language of all of that, the written language of all that information, of that history. You see, the written language is also a repository of the history of the language. So you don't want to do away with that. I mean, it takes a little more effort to learn to spell, but it's worth it. It's worth it because, let's face it, we have roots. We're not just people who are just born out of nothing, and it's good to know those roots. We take up the ER, the IR, the OR, the UR, the sound, as in clerk, yearn, work, thirsty, thirst. In other words, they're all but they're spelled in different ways. Earth is spelled EAR. Hurt is spelled ER. Work is spelled OR. You see. Burn is spelled UR. But they're all and you just have to learn which ones are spelled in which way. Then we get to the TION. Nation, station, fraction, facial, etc. They're all of Latin origin. And that's why we have these peculiar spellings, because we pronounce them differently from what they were originally pronounced. And then the very final lesson is the Y as short I in words as assist, Jim, him. Those words come from Greek, and that's why we have that short Y. So that's all there is to it. Now, once the child has completed this, then they're ready to read anything. And now you're learning English. See, this simply teaches you the mechanics of reading our alphabetic system. Yes, it also taught vocabulary, it also taught punctuation, it also taught you divide up words into syllables, it taught you contractions, but basically it taught you the mechanics of reading our alphabetic system, and now from there on, you're teaching English, you're teaching grammar, you're teaching vocabulary. And so how do you do that? You give the child interesting things to read, the Bible, you take the child to the library, and have the child pick out books that he or she would like to read. You want to make sure that the child is interested in what he or she is doing. Because you want to take advantage of that tremendous self-teaching instinct that all of us are born with. Remember, we all teach ourselves to speak our own language. We don't need Sesame Street for that. Kids don't need clowns jumping out of garbage cans to teach them how to speak, do they? But they use them to teach them how to read. That's not necessary. But the point is that you want to use this tremendous self-teaching instinct that we all have, and to use that. And all you're going to do is, here's this train that's going at a great speed, you're going to give it even a greater push, you see. And that's what learning to read our alphabetic system does. It opens the world of literature. It permits the child to read anything and everything, and the entire world of literature is now open to that child and learning. And children do develop interests early in life, and and what you do is you go along with it. You see. But you don't try to impose too much, and you give your child as much freedom as you think he or she needs to develop, and you will have quite a good learner as a result. Now, as I said, teach them cursive to begin with. So that's what there is to this Alpha-Phonics. It's very simple. It's being used by thousands of homeschoolers throughout America. I've had nothing but good words said by parents who are using the book. I've only had one complaint, and that was from a grandmother who bought it because she wanted to help her grandchild who was in school. And she complained because in my book the A is printed like a printed A, and she wanted a ball and stick A. And also, she wanted a ball and stick G. And I have a regular printed G. So Incidentally, this is not really done in print. All of this was done by a calligrapher, by hand. Every single word and letter by hand. So it's very readable. It's easy to read. No pictures. Why? Children don't need pictures. You know, I've never had anybody ever ask for pictures. Never a child, never an adult. I think adults will probably want the picture. Pictures are distracting. The children don't need Mickey Mouse. You see, what we do is we denigrate our children. We babyfy them. We tell them, oh, you're not so smart. What Sesame Street does, it says, kids, we know you don't want to learn, so we're going to coat everything in sugar and candy, and you will be learning without even knowing it. I mean, what an insult to children who teach themselves to speak their own language, to infer that they don't want to learn. Every child wants to learn to read. The problem is that schools don't know how to teach them, or don't want to teach them, you see. But every child wants to learn to read. You know, they look at these books and they're just dying to know how to read, and you can assist them in teaching them. All right, I'll stop here now, and I'll take all your questions. Yes? Yes.
At what point in this particular book would you say it's, how old is the child?
To start?
Yeah, to start.
Well, the youngest that I know of is a 3.5-year-old young girl who came up to me with her mother at a convention like this in Portland, Oregon, and I was just so delighted because her mother said she's learning to read, so I asked her to read for me, and so she opened the page to her latest lesson, and she read the sentences perfectly. This is a 3.5-year-old. Very intelligent, articulate little girl, and by the time she was 4, she was done with it. I would say that there are two things you look for. First of all, if the child has developed a decent speaking vocabulary, that's the first thing you need. And second, that they want to learn to read.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, if they're 8 years old and haven't expressed a desire yet, you know, just tell them you're learning to read, you know. But most children want to learn to read. The reason why they're turned off is because somewhere along the line it has been made so difficult and so onerous to them that it's become a painful chore. But it can be delightful in this way because it's so easy and so sensible. And you see, I appeal to the child's sense of logic. Remember, when you're teaching yourself to speak your own language as a little child, you're using your brain and your logic, and you're figuring things out, you see. So I respect that marvelous logic that those children have in their brains, and that's why I do it in this systematic way. And children love it because they take to it. Their brains are made that way, you see. You had a question, didn't you?
I have two. Do you introduce all of the consonants or just some of them in that book?
Well, all of the consonants, but one at a time.
Okay, because I noticed you use 5 of them, and then you show where you added new consonants just to vowels.
Pardon? Well, you have to teach every consonant.
Right.
But first you start off with 5, and then as you go along you add.
Add the consonants.
Yeah, every lesson. For example, in this lesson here, in lesson 9, we also teach V and W, Y, and Z. So we teach sometimes more than one consonant per lesson.
All right, and the other question was, you said you group them in their families.
Right.
What specific orders do you call, like what do you call family? All A with its consonants is a family?
Yeah, if it has at the end, the ending is the family, like fad, mad, lad, that would be the spelling family, you see. Or bright, light, sight, that's a family, you see. A rhyming word, you might say if it rhymes, well, not exactly, no, it just as the, yeah, that would be it, rhyming, sure, that's the way you would judge a family. Yes?
Sam, how quickly should someone take their child through that book?
There's no set rate. I would say that some children learn faster than others.
Sure.
It's not a race, you know.
Right.
So you just start at the beginning, go through it at the child's pace. I would say that probably it'd be all done in a year at most, you know. It depends on how much time you spend a day at it. Do you spend 10 minutes a day, an hour a day? Do you do it five days a week, 7 days a week? You know, that also, you have to take that into consideration.
So in essence, after completing that book, the child could go to the library and read any book.
It should be able to read. Well, what you have the child do is read aloud to you, read the book with you aloud, and then you see what they come across a word that they don't know, then you have them look it up in the dictionary, or you have them, if they can't pronounce it, you have them break it up into syllables so that they can pronounce it, one syllable at a time.
Do you ever bring them back to that book?
Yeah, sometimes you might want to. If they seem to be having some problems with a particular spelling form, and you might want to bring them back just to give them a little drill, that sort of thing. Yeah, you could use it. Yes, ma'am.
I was just curious as to how that learning your way of thinking of having them recognize the names of the letters first, rather than teaching them the sounds first.
Well, because the names of the letters, you want to know you want to be able to deal with it. For example, in teaching children who have problems, I find that one of the most useful things is if they have problems with the words, is to have them spell it. And when they spell the word, then the letters are arranged in their mind in the proper order. But the letters have names. How are you going to deal with? How are you going to refer to the letters unless you can say the names? I have found that children do not have any problem. They understand the difference between the letter names and the sounds that they stand for. Just tell that to them. I know there are some systems that say don't teach the letter names, just teach the sound. That's because they've been so frightened by this idea that children can't learn the sounds. You see, this whole Lupse method has produced such deformity in our reading programs because there's so much fear, because children haven't been able to learn to read that way, so they're trying all sorts of fancy experiments when this is the method that was used 2,000 years ago. It's not really new. Yes?
Could you take a lesson in the book and give us an example of how you would actually present it to a child?
Yeah, well, the lessons are described in the back of the book. Every single lesson. All of the lessons are described. Take, for example, lesson 79. Long A as EI and EIGH. Introduce these two additional ways of writing long A. They are less common than A consonant E, AI, AY, and EY, but they include some frequently used words. Expand the pupil's reading vocabulary to include these words. Their use is demonstrated in the practice sentences. Point out incidentally that we know 3 ways to write long A, EY, EI, EIGH, in which the letter A does not appear. So it tells you what to say.
So it's totally a one-on-one.
Oh, yeah. This is a one-on-one kind of program. It can be used with a group, too, if you wanted to. Sure. Yes?
With teaching the children cursive first, isn't there a problem because they're seeing the printed letters on the page, and you're teaching them to write with a different method?
It does not propose any problem. All of our generation was taught that way. It never was a problem. I've never heard of anyone having a problem not being able to distinguish between the printed letters and the written letters. You're just learning 2 forms of the letters, that's all. No problem. Yes?
Now what about teaching uppercase letters?
You teach them all. You teach the uppercase and lowercase. You teach them all. Remember, at the beginning you have the time to teach the child the letters correctly. If you start teaching printing and then later on you want to make a transition to cursive, then the child has to slow down and learn all over again how to form the letters, and they resent that. They don't like having to learn a whole new system when they should have been taught the cursive system first to begin with. Let me go in the back. Yes, thank you.
What do you think of the phonics tapes, like playing off and non-phonics?
Well, they're not necessary, you see. There's an awful lot of, as I say, there are no pictures here, there are no games, no dancing, no singing, no nothing. Why? Because when children taught themselves to speak their own language, did they need games? Did they need songs, dances? No. You want to treat them like the serious human beings they are. They want to get through this as quickly as possible without all the extra. And so that all of that stuff is just added on. It's unnecessary. Yes, ma'am. I can't hear, I'm sorry.
Writing. Couple things. One, what do you think of pencil grips to teach them to hold right? What do you think of the idea of so many kids now are all into markers instead of crayons, and it seems like it's
Well, I would get them back to pens. Get them a nice, fine ballpoint or whatever you call these things. You could use a pencil to begin with. I don't think there's anything wrong.
Do you think they harm it all instead of, because you hold markers and you hold the...
Well, markers you get these very broad. You don't have as much better control as you do with a pen. You want,
play.
Oh, well, in play that's something else. Yeah, in play that's all
What
right.
about the italic writing curriculum? They teach them to print in italics, and so all they do is connect the...
Well, let me explain to you one thing. Children learn, there's one writing style that each of us masters. We don't master more than one writing style. We master the writing style that we're going to use for the rest of our lives. You know, writing our checks and writing our diaries and writing our whatever it is we write. That's our basic form of writing. Now, if you want to learn italic, if you want to print up beautiful cards, if you're going to have a wedding and want to print up invitations, that's something else. But to use italic as your everyday writing form is ridiculous. It's like wearing a tuxedo every day. You know, it's a highly stylized, formal way of writing that is not very utilitarian for today's... Oh no, you don't have to. You don't have to go through these steps. Learn cursive directly. You know, you don't need a three-wheeled bicycle. That's what I'm saying. You don't need that intermediate step.
What curriculum do you recommend? Right?
Well, in my How to Tutor book, I have a section on writing, which teaches you cursive writing very simply. Very simple. Very simple. All right, that lady in the back.
Your emphasis on automatic that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it's 4 o'clock.
Is that going to equip us with the idea that children have a heightened sense of curiosity and therefore enhance their memory, or is it just you want to try and stop that happening?
Well, no, it has to become automatic. That's what makes it easy. You don't have to think about it, you see. It becomes automatic because it becomes part of your reflexes, you see. That's why you want it, and also it prevents bad habits. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. That was excellent.